Welcome to the stream. I'm Josh Rushing, sitting in for Femi Oke. The UN and international aid groups warn that hundreds of thousands of children in Sudan are bearing the brunt of rising food prices and poverty a year after the country's military took power in a coup. And they say millions more children are missing out on school education, depriving a young generation of opportunity. On today's episode of the stream, we ask how children in Sudan are faring and what's needed to bring immediate relief. Oh, hey, if you're watching this on YouTube, you see that over there, that chat box? We have a live stream producer there waiting to get your questions and comments to me so I can get them to our guests. So help me out here, be a part of the show, right? Joining us to talk about the challenges facing Sudan's children, we have Arshad Malik. He's country director at Save the Children Sudan. He's in Johannesburg today, but normally based in Sudan. Nahid Garbala is a human rights activist at the SEMA Center, a Khartoum-based group dedicated to helping women and children. And we have Al Jazeera correspondent Hiba Morgan. She is also in Khartoum. So, Hiba, actually, let me begin with you, the viewer. If you're watching this, I need you to stop right now. I need you to see these numbers. Check this out. Top line, 3 million children in Sudan are facing malnutrition, 650 of those acute malnutrition. And here's what I need you to hear. Half of those could die without treatment. Hiba, I can't get my head around 300,000 plus children facing death through malnutrition. I can only really understand it through one child, one mom, one family. And that's what you're reporting on Al Jazeera English, I think, does for us. I want to share a clip of that now with our audience.
When Amna Mahmoud's 1-year-old daughter Hawa started to lose weight 4 months ago, she thought it was just a phase. But Hawa's health continued to deteriorate, and now Amna has brought her to a malnutrition center for treatment.
Because of the cost of food in the market, most of the time we can only afford to give her milk. Things are very expensive, and even when I nurse her, there's not enough to keep her full.
So it sounds like the mom there said that most of the time they can't afford milk in the market, but because the price has gone up, they now can't. Well, how much of the price has gone up and why? What's happening there?
Well, first of all, you have to understand that that Sudan's economy has been in a downward spiral, and it's one of the things that triggered the anti-government protests against Bashir in late 2018. Now, people have been pretty much earning more or less the same salaries, especially civil servants, you know. People make about 30,000, 40,000 Sudanese pounds now, and that's less than $100 a month. And these are people who hold stable jobs. Many of the people, they work on a day-to-day basis, you know, they're daily income earners. And for them to be able to keep up with the market prices is just quite hard. Now, just look at it this way. A bottle of milk, let's say 4 or 5 years back, would cost about 20 maybe Sudanese pounds. But now when you go to the market, it could cost up to like 1,000 Sudanese pounds. So that's quite expensive for many families to afford, especially if they have multiple.
Wait. I want to make sure I understood you. What were the numbers there? Did you say say the numbers again? Because surely it couldn't have gone up as much as I think I just heard.
Well, yes, it did. If you're looking at it over the past 5 years, yes, it has gone up greatly. And again, many people, civil servants, they still pretty much earn the same salaries they've been earning. And even if it has increased, so has the inflation, so has the devaluation of the Sudanese pounds. When you look at their salaries, many people earn less than $100 a month. And that money that they earn, they have to use it to put their children in school, to feed them, clothe them. If you need to take them to the hospital, there's the public transports that they need to move around. So all of that on just like a monthly income, for many people, that's just very hard to live by. And when you have kids to feed, you have to choose about what you can get. Do you want something that's nutritious, or do you want something that's affordable to keep their bellies full?
Oh, that's a terrible choice to make. Arshad, what's it like right now trying to run a humanitarian agency there in Sudan?
I think it's first of all, we need to appreciate what Hiba was saying about the current situation in Sudan. So there are multiple factors which have impacted the overall food security situation, which is worsening. We have the conflict, in multiple parts of the country. We have definitely, as Hiba said, the prices or inflation going to skyrocketing. The seasonal impact of the on the food security situation in the country has also worsened the situation. Considering 95% of the household spend more than 65% of the total expenditure on food, even a slight increase in the food prices will have significant impact, and that's according to the World Food Programme. Now, us as aid agencies, we are dealing with massively increasing needs in the country across everywhere, and with the very limited resources. We normally talk about the in-country situation. We always talk about what the responsibility of the government is. I think while not discussing the rationales behind the suspension of international aid, I think the impact of suspension of international aid is very, very severe on the people of Sudan, the people and children of Sudan. And that's something we need to appreciate and kind of find a solution. How do we get the international community to agree to continue supporting the people of Sudan going forward?
Arshad, just to be clear, the suspension of international aid, is that because of the military coup?
As I said, definitely there are political decisions made by the international community, but the impact of those political decisions is now showing on the people of Sudan. There are around 12 million people, exactly 11.7 million people, according to the UN assessment, which are not having access to the food they need. Mm-hmm. That's quarter of the population. So while I'm not a political commentator who can talk about what the rationales were for suspension of aid, the situation demands that the international community needs to consider that people and children of Sudan need that international aid as soon as possible.
Hey, look, I want to note for our viewers that all three of our guests are actually based in Sudan, but we also have a handful of video comments from people in Sudan as well. So I want to share this one. This is Maktoum Abdallah. He's a youth advocate with UNICEF Sudan.
In Sudan, almost 7 million children are out of school due to instability, conflict, and displacement. Moreover, 3 million children under 5 are acutely malnourished. Because of instability, many young people are resorting to illegal immigration, and many boys end up implicated in armed groups. We must not delay acting so as to not lose the upcoming generation.
Nahid, can you tell us what you're hearing from families, from mothers who are on the ground there trying to survive?
We have to say it. This is because of the coup. We have to talk politics when we are talking about hunger, about lives, about education. The cut of the humanitarian aid is actually the outcome of the military, of the coup. What we are hearing is actually reflecting the reports that is coming and alarming us about the very bad situation, and the outcome is the lack of food, the hunger, and even the death because of the famine. Now it is getting more and more worse, and we have to add that with the political situation, not only in Sudan, but in the region, now there is floods of refugees and immigrants coming to Sudan. All the region is actually very fragile, but Sudan, after the coup, is different from Sudan before, while we were going actively towards economic flourishing. Now we are much more back, and things is getting worse and worse. And this is what we can summarize from the families and from individuals, from the children, and what is reflected directly on the ground.
So I want to bring in some voices from our YouTube audience. These are voices from you, people who are watching live right now. Isabel Wabi says, heartbreaking. Missy Billy says, the things we take for granted. Further down, I think Kay Biggins, 1978, says, give them food. You know, Arshad, it's not just that simple, is it? Give them food. Where does the food come from?
It's a very good question, which you said. Like Sudanese economy is highly dependent on agriculture, as nearly 65% of the population is engaged in it. And prices for agricultural input have risen dramatically due to the inflation, the economic crisis, and the international factors such as the war in Ukraine. So this has very severely impacted on the overall, as I said before, food security situation, rising prices of fuel, fertilizers, agriculture tools, inputs, electricity prices are also going up. And this has a knock-on effect on the inflation and definitely with significant increases, as Hiba mentioned earlier on the most of the basic commodities such as transportation and any other service you talk about. This then results into the raising of the cost of the inputs for overall local production. So there are multiple factors which are contributing. You mentioned the number earlier on. 3 million children are facing acute malnourishment out of 6.8 million children in the same age group. But we are now fearing about 4 million cases of under 5 children and pregnant and lactating mother. They are also estimated to be acute malnourished and in need of like urgent humanitarian life-saving nutrition services. So as I said before, while completely not commenting on the political or what the rationales behind the suspension, I think I'll reiterate the same point again. Humanitarian aid is not like there is humanitarian aid. I think that there is need for much more. As you asked me before, what is it like working as a humanitarian implementer in this country? And that's exactly what it means. We have very, very limited resources. We're gigantic needs in the country and ever increasing as well.
We've lost Hiba for a minute, but we haven't lost her good reporting. I want to bring in another thing because you mentioned the coup has been brought up a couple of times, right? But what's happening in Ukraine has been mentioned. I think is climate change also at play here. There's been massive flooding in Sudan lately. Here, let's look at Hiba's report on the flooding in the southern state of Darfur. Check this out.
This is the road to Zaid village south of South Darfur's capital, Niala. It's one of the latest villages to be affected by heavy rains and flash floods in Sudan. Many are now living out in the open.
We have seriously been affected. My house was damaged, all the furniture was damaged and carried away by the water. This room is now completely destroyed. All my beds are broken, all my jerry cans have been carried away by the stream. I didn't manage to recover anything, and now we sit in the water.
So Nahid, the mother was saying that the flood had really broken on her beds, taken away everything in her home. What kind of access does she have to help? You could see a young child behind her. She clearly has others to provide for. Where can she turn to in South Darfur?
In South Darfur, of course, this is also linked to the climate change, but another link to the bad planning and to the corruption. Even the aid that is brought to the needy ones, victims of the floods, actually is absorbed by the corruption. I would like also to say that this happened in Jazeera state, in Middle Sudan, and in many areas. The security authorities intervened and stopped many of the initiatives to support needy persons and victims of the floods in many areas in Sudan. And I think it is important that adding to this natural crisis and the stopping and the problems with the cuts in the humanitarian aid, also we had here the problem of the failure of the agriculture season due to the problems, economical problems, problems of planning, corruption, and the lack of institutions. After the coup, we can say that there is no government even. It is something that cannot be called authorities. So the coup is actually ruining what I'm building the factors for more and more crises, mainly hunger and famine.
And Arshad, I was reading something from UNICEF that was saying, and I'm going to quote this, it says that routine immunization is declining in Sudan. Between 2019 and 2021, the number of children who have not received a single dose of life-saving vaccines has doubled. So basically saying like half the kids are now getting vaccines that used to just 2 years ago. Arshad, what's happening with that?
So I'll quote the what we call the EPI, or the expanded program on immunization. As of end of November, it indicated that 84% children under the age of 1 year received their third dose of combined vaccine, with a dropout of around 3% compared to the first dose of prevention. So that's the UNICEF report I'm quoting. And 78% of the children received measles vaccination in 2021, which was a rise from the 2 years earlier. But because of the budget gaps and a routine immunization service delivery, which was identified in 2021, there were multiple factors which affected what UNICEF is quoting, which is currency devaluation, and also the low vaccine coverage because of that in the first half of the 2021, and which was 68%, a drop of from 80%, 84% to. And I think that there were challenges which were COVID also kind of affected the overall vaccination, the immunization situation. So yeah, it's definitely a worrying situation. But yeah, that's what I'll say on this one. Lack of access, I think that's another issue. And when I say lack of access, it's not that we have been denied access, but it's the insecurity or the situation where we don't have resources to meet some of the demands.
Yeah, so I want to bring in another voice here from Sudan.
Add another factor, please. That for the first time in Sudan history, the government now is putting charge for getting the routine vaccination. This is happening for the first time in Sudan history, and now hospitals, families have to pay for their children to be vaccinated. And of course, this is put in the picture that there is all the other factors of poverty and awareness problem and access to vaccine and health problems. So now it will be more and more worse.
I'm going to bring in another voice. This is from our community. His name is Musab Abdelhadi, and he's a children's rights activist.
In my opinion, there are so many reasons that so many Sudanese children miss class or even drop out of school because the inflation or hunger crisis affecting the country. While government keeps talking about free education opportunities, a few lucky children with good access to good school, they don't have necessary resources.
So I'd like to make a turn here toward the end of the show, although I can see, Arshad, you want to jump into the conversation. Go for that. I think
it was something which I wanted to mention. A figure which, again, as I kept on mentioning about the lack of international support at the moment. In 2019, the government contributed 35% to the vaccination cost of the bundle vaccine, whereas in 2021 it was zero. That shows the limited resources government has, and that's where I keep on saying international community needs to step up and continue supporting the. I'll repeat that again. I'm sorry, I know I'm repeating it, but that's extremely important that the message goes out to international community. Sudanese people and children need that support at this point of time.
And if we're talking about the children of Sudan and their future, I'd like to talk about their educational opportunities. Heb has also done some reporting on that, so I'd like to share this package with you guys now.
Zainab Abbakar is helping her son Ammar get ready to start the school year. He was due to start his 6th grade more than a week ago.
The start of the school year has been postponed 3 times this year. First, we were told it would start in September. Then we were told the 2nd of October. Then they told us this week that it would be the 9th of October. Education has not been stable, and that has led to our kids not being stable either.
Children's education keeps being interrupted. First COVID, then mass protests, and now flooding, which destroyed more than 60 schools here. Those schools that were untouched by the flooding are now used as shelters by families who lost their homes.
So I just want to bring in a couple of voices from YouTube. This is Grace Nadiri, who says it's really sad. Children are vulnerable and most marginalized in society, and now they're facing malnutrition. And we have Hiba on the phone. Hiba, can you hear me? Oh, no, Hiba's back. Hey, how are you? Welcome to the last few minutes of the show. Thanks. We've been sharing your reporting. We actually just shared the package about the mom trying to get her child back in school. Can you talk to me about the struggle that families have there with getting the children into school?
Well, it's mostly, again, the economy. Now, that's just one of the families we spoke to in Kassala in Eastern Sudan. There were other families who we spoke to, and they say that the issues with regards to getting their children in school are the fees. And we're talking about something that for some people may be symbolic. You know, it could be less than $10 to afford clothes, to afford books. But for many people, again, if you're earning less than $100 a month, that is just too much. So many families can't afford to pay for school books. They can't afford to pay for clothes. Then there's the issue of school lunches. They have to get sandwiches for their children to be able to feed themselves when they're at school. And for a lot of families, that's just a little bit too much. So many families, even if they do manage to get their children in the first years of education and in the schooling system, they just can't continue to keep them in that system because it's just getting too expensive. And so what they prefer to do, especially for the boys, is to pull them out of school, have them work in the markets to help the family with their income, because for them, the priority is keeping the family fed as opposed to, you know, spending money to keep their children in school.
Yeah, so look, we only have a few minutes left in the show, and I want to get to what the international community needs to do. I'm going to bring in another voice from our community. This is Jada Doyen McKenna. She's the CEO of Mercy Corps.
We urgently need global donors to step up with nutrition, health, and humanitarian assistance for Sudan. In fact, the current appeal for Sudan is only 40% funded. In addition, we will need to help communities cope with recurring climate shocks by doing things such as helping them to protect grazing land and water resources. This will be critical going forward.
So, Arshad, she said in that the need is only 40% funded, the international need for Sudan, 40% funded. What does that mean? And does that number ring true to you for your organization, Save the Children? And what does 40% mean? Like, what can you not do because you're only at 40%?
So, yeah, it's right. 40% of the overall humanitarian response plan, which was developed for 2022, is funded, which means that there is a 60% gap in terms of the actual funding requested for implementing some emergency like humanitarian implementation. So I think what that means is that there are gaps still left. And most importantly, I think the two sectors which always get ignored is education and protection. And I'll specifically mention education as one of the least prioritized sector, which is not getting the attention of the international community. Hiba mentioned about the economic barriers internally, the 55% of the schools charging fee, teachers incentive. There are like reduced household purchasing power due to the inflation, cultural barriers, including child labor and kids going to support their parents in the harvesting season. But also, as we spoke about the poor nutrition and health situation, that also is impacting the overall education situation. So I think we need to deal with the education emergency, because this will, if we are not addressing the situation immediately.
You know, Arshad, it's so hard to deal with the future when you have to triage the crisis that's right in front of you. And that crisis is happening in Sudan as we speak. That's all the time we have for today's show. I want to thank all of our guests for joining us. I want to thank you for watching the stream. And of course, Al Jazeera English will continue to follow Sudan in the months and years ahead.